Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, how do you make your content more compelling? What are the emotions that you should tap into to tell a better story? Is humor always the right way? And are you using all of your assets into creating a really compelling brand story? Bill Connolly is the director of content at Monotype, an author, speaker, comedian, and he's a subject matter expert at creative storytelling. And on this episode, we'll discuss how to make your storytelling more compelling and expressive using visuals, fonts, comedy, improv, humor, emotions, trust, and much more. So let's tune in to a type font storytelling expert with a type A shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. So tell the world a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you today.
Same.
So I've had kind of an interesting career, I guess. My main background is as a marketer, and more specifically as a content marketer. So I started my career working in agencies, both from a data side as well as more of a kind of digital side. And I started more as a generalist, so I've had experience with marketing automation and event management and website and content and all sorts of stuff. And I just sort of stumbled into writing more, and didn't consider myself a writer. I still sort of don't consider myself a writer, but I do a lot of it. And as my career has gone on, I've found more of a niche within content and telling stories on behalf of companies. So within my current role, I work at a company called Monotype, which is a really interesting company. We're mostly known because we have all the font. we own a lot of the world's iconic font, like Helvetica, which we just reintroduced recently, Helvetica Now. And but the company's evolved to be more about brand expression
Mm-hmm.
and empowering creative expression. And so I'm responsible for content there, and I tell a lot of great stories with my team about the work that we're doing to help brands express themselves. But that's kind of how the long and short of how I got to where I'm at right now.
Well, what was it like to work on Boondock Saints and The Hobbit? I mean, I thought you were fantastic in both of those. I know
Well,
your Google results are screwed up for forever because of this guy from Scotland.
yes, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Billy Connolly, in that I'll never appear on the first page of Google, but also
It's good
he's
for
kind of a
scandals.
he's kind of a badass namesake
Yeah.
that he's a very successful comedian, and I could share a name with someone worse. So
Yeah.
although I'm hopeful that they'll start sending me royalties checks by accident.
No
That hasn't
kidding.
happened yet.
Well, you got an office in L.A. You could just
Yeah,
claim his and your say social followers together, and that just tell them to go search it. I guess that would be good. But
technically, Billy Connolly has tons of followers.
exactly.
We don't need to decide who it is, who it belongs to.
So, one of the things that interested me, other than content and that strategy behind that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. And it's how we got introduced through a mutual friend. But talk a little bit about your background in comedy and improv, and you're teaching professionals how to use comedic methodology to enhance their skills, improve their creativity. And I know you've taught that at universities and conferences and organizations and companies. How have you done that? And how are you teaching somebody to be funnier?
Yeah, so I sort of left that out in my little career blurb,
Yeah,
but when I
a little bit.
when I started my career, I mean, I did some stand up in college, and then I really transitioned into improvisational comedy, and very quickly I learned that doing improv was something I loved, but it also was transcending other parts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
There was very transferable skill set that comes with performing that helped me to
Agreed.
network better, to be speaking. Um, there was a lot of kind of great um, overlap,
Yeah.
and so I that's why I started writing my first book, because I was finding that there was this great overlap. And so over the last decade, I have explored that really well. And I don't mean I'm doing it well. I just mean I've looked in all corners of my life to see how I can overlap even better, because a lot of my friends who are comedians, that is their role, and then I have other friends who are in the business world, and that is their role. And I've sort of taken a hybrid approach, because I like having my cake and eating it too. So I have
You like
um,
not being
I've
broke.
I well, yeah. I mean, I like living. I just can't give up anything.
Yeah.
I can't say no to stuff. Is
Yeah.
the thing. So I'm like, I like working my job. I love marketing, but I also think that there's a way to infuse or comedy with it.
Absolutely.
So I've done a lot of training for creative professionals on how they can basically just become more of themselves. So the way that you phrase it, of how you can become more funny or infuse comedy into marketing or content, isn't really even how I think about it. It's not training people to become funny. It's just training people to get out of their own
Yeah.
head,
Yeah.
so they can do what is most organic to them, and they can be more of their true self in professional situations.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, because I too have done stand up before. I think I told you before, I'm a failed stand up
Mm-hmm.
comedian like most of us, but it does have a transferable skill. I think the biggest difference between speaking on a stage and telling jokes versus speaking at a conference and talking about marketing and trying to infuse some learning is, most of the time at the marketing conferences, the crowd is not completely drunk and throwing things or heckling you, but it does help you really
Most
get
of
out of
the
your,
time.
most of the time, depends on the conference group, but it does really help you come out of your shell, be less afraid of being more expressive, be more creative, more so than, to your point, not necessarily trying to teach them to be funny. But how do you take that from a brand standpoint? Most people don't think of fonts, but I know you write a lot about how your company, for example, using fonts or helping people become more expressive and creative. Kind of unpack that a little bit with what you're doing with content at Monotype.
Yeah. So I mean, I will say I benefit from having a really wonderful team that's very thoughtful and creative. And one of the things, I came to Monotype because the company acquired a company I was working for called Olapix. So I knew nothing about font.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married to a graphic designer,
Mm-hmm.
so she loves fonts and
Yeah.
typography, and had gotten some cursory knowledge from that. But I'm not a visual creative myself. I'm not a designer, so I didn't have this inherent appreciation for it. I'd say one of the most incredible things that I've learned from working at Monotype is to watch the designers themselves, both the ones that are designing the typography that we sell, um, and the designers who use it, who use it in their daily practice to build brands, is just the sheer passion for typography that exists, and it's an infectious um, energy. Like passion, I think people that are passionate about something, even if you're not passionate about it, it's an infectious energy to be around
Absolutely.
somebody who really cares about something that they're working on and cares about their craft. So what we try to do is just shine. We're not architecting stories. We're just shining a light on the work that is being done, oftentimes with either to create typography, and that's what our designers are doing, which is a really, like the Helvetica now typeface that I mentioned. Reimagining Helvetica for a modern world was just a really interesting project that we got to work on. But also, when we're working with brands, how are they using typography to convey their brand aesthetic, to deliver authentic experiences for their customers? And it's not just typography, but like I said, I came through acquisition and the Olapic side of the business. We help brands create visual content, user generated content, short form video that really works in digital environments. So how are all those kind of assets um, coming together to tell a really compelling brand story? And that's what we're trying to just take those things and turn them into our own story as well. And so that's how we approach it. And I think it's been really fun and interesting to get to see how some of the leading brands of the world are evolving and changing with the times and trying to be better for their customers.
What are the things that that you look at from a best practice then with from creating content, being more creative with your own content, and what some of the advice you give other marketers out there, because I know you're speaking at conferences about this kind of thing and how they can become more expressive as well.
Well, I think that you, and this is again where I think comedy can kind of teaches me a lot about how to think about this stuff, which is you need to communicate with your desired audience in the way that they want to be communicated with.
Mm.
And you need to think about what type of information do they want to know and will engage them and will be entertaining to them, as opposed to what do you want to make them hear. And if you take that kind of outward in approach, like with a comedian, if you just get up there and start rambling on about like you just go head on at the start of your set into the most crazy material you have, you're going to lose people because they're not on your side yet. They don't trust you yet. And the same thing is true when you're building content, or when you're speaking, or whatever you're doing. When you're selling, you want to build trust with your audience. So, we try to be strategic. We try to create content that doesn't sell our product right away. It just says, here's what we're seeing is happening in the market. Here's what we think you could benefit from as a social media marketer, as a creative director, as a brand marketer, whatever it is. And we're trying to build that trust and rapport so that when it comes time when you might need services that we provide, we can engage in that type of dialogue. But I think a lot of the mistake I see a lot of content marketers make is that they're very heavy-handed with their sales approach, and you can't make someone listen to your message. You have to build trust so that they will want to listen to your message. And that's kind of how, it's kind of the approach we take. It's not really rocket science, but it's easier said than done, of course, when you have metrics you're trying to hit, and you're trying to make sure that everything you do has a ROI attached to it, and that sort of thing. So it's difficult to balance, but I think that's what makes for a successful content program, is that you're really trying to provide value to the audience, as opposed to just tie everything to a sale.
I didn't know you worked for the New England Patriots.
It did when I was in college. Yeah, I worked. I'm a huge Patriots fan. I'm a native Bostonian. So, well, I'm from New Hampshire, so I'm a native New England person. But that was an interesting job. I mean, I guess the one thing I'll say, because everything I'm talking about is so all over the place, right? I have books, I do comedy, I have a job. All of these things I love for different reasons. But the way I think about my work, and the way I pursue activities and projects, whether it's a book that I'm writing or whether it's a content project for Monotype, is, does it fit into the filter of storytelling? That's where I think my value is, and that's where I really look at how can I add value. And I really love creating stories that maybe didn't exist before. And that's what I really like about my job at Monotype, is that our creativity that we possess, that we've built for more than 100 years, helps brands tell great stories. And that's what we're trying to do on the content side. When I'm writing or doing other things, that's kind of the same thing. So the job at the Patriots, another example, my job there was to experience the staff of the Patriots during events, during concerts and games, and then come up with how we can tell a better story to our customers,
Mm-hmm.
how we can create a better experience for our customers. It was really kind of an interesting job to have as a college student. But those are really the opportunities that I really appreciate, is where I can get in the weeds and figure out, okay, what is good about this experience, and how can we make it great? How can we tell a great story?
Well, and everybody knows how funny Bill Belichick is, so that must have
Another hilarious Bill
yeah, another hilarious Bill.
that
And you were in
that we just had.
quality control at the New England Patriots. You left before Deflategate, so
I was there. I was there during the Matt Castle era. If there's any football fans
yeah.
who remember that season.
What are the other kinds of brands that you see that are succeeding with humor in their marketing and branding and content and things like that? Because it's something that so many different brands struggle with. And I've done this with brands over my life, and some have been serious brands who tried to be funny. Some of them were funnier brands, but they weren't as funny as they thought. It was always, it really depends on the audience and the context in particular, as you well know. But when you look at brands out there that, as a former comedian and improv actor, what are the brands that you see that are sort of creating those good emotional connections with good, solid comedic type content or humorous type content?
So there's so many, right? I think that it doesn't. The ones that I see a lot. I live in Los Angeles, so I'm exposed to a lot of advertising. And what I think is I really enjoy is unique about Los Angeles is it's still a billboard culture
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Like it's one of the only cities I think left that relies on billboards as a primary way to communicate with people because there's so much traffic and people are in their cars. And a lot of the billboards promote the entertainment, movies and television and whatnot. But
that got national attention, like when LeBron James was being courted.
yeah, exactly. They use it to make commentary, social commentary as well.
Exactly.
And so some of the brands that I think are doing a really good job are the digitally native, you know, direct to consumer brands like Grubhub and Spotify. Spotify does a great job, I think, with kind of their year end wrap ups of like what
Mm-hmm.
was listened to um, by city and by artists and that sort of thing. And they had some really funny, at the turn of the year, have some really funny um, material that they market. Same with kind of Grubhub and Postmates is another one where they had some really fun things. I was talking to somebody who worked on those campaigns yesterday, just talking about like when you're too lazy to go to the store, we got you, or
Mm-hmm.
when you're too afraid to pronounce. I think the example said when you're too afraid to pronounce acai bowl in public, we got you. Like
Right.
things like that I
Right.
think are really kind of connecting to who they're serving. I think you mentioned Wendy's and some of the other ones
Yeah.
that are really funny on Twitter. But the distinction I'll make is it's like being an improviser itself, is that you should not try to be funny for the sake of being funny. What I think
Agreed.
I would advise for brands to do, and it's what I try to do in my own work, is to just be more authentic, be more of who you are. Because it might not be funny per se, or you might find unintentional comedy that happens as a result of opening up those floodgates and just becoming more honest with yourself about who your brand is. And there's some really awesome brands that are not necessarily using humor, but are really tapping into what their audience cares about. And so for some brands, that's humor. For other brands, like say Patagonia or Tom's, that are really focused on social causes, and that's what's important to them is they want to have a voice and make a stand about what they believe is right in society. That's really resonating
Yeah.
with their audiences. So
Absolutely.
so so that's kind of the distinction I'll make. There's some great brands that are using humor, and there's some great brands that are using just good old fashioned honest communication, and both can work.
Absolutely. And I've also, I think there's going to be a challenge for people that were really, to borrow the expression, creative again, that know how to be creatively humorous and funny over more of a storytelling type, because instead of looking at it as one, TV commercial, which, people used to throw all their comedy into a 30-second ad. It aired on the Super Bowl. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. But now I think it's really evolving into more complex, longer running stories. So if you're going to attack comedy, if you will, and inject it into your storytelling, one, be authentic, two, be funny, and make sure you integrate it well into the story and make sure you got a good story focus first. So,
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Focus the story first, and humor may come as a result from it, and that's great.
exactly.
But I think if you try to force humor, people can smell that. They can sniff that out. They don't care for it. So if you try to tell a great story and humor happens, that's a better way to approach it.
From a content perspective,
Yep.
where and I know where I think you'll probably say, but where do you see that it's best to use your creative expression, and that can be with comedy and humor, or it could be something else. It could be just going crazy with font types. But what do you sort of see as your most creative channel that allows you and helps you educate other marketers on where to be creative and expressive and sometimes humorous?
Well, I think that video is, from a channel perspective, I like video because I think you can see a lot more of that process. I mean,
Hmm.
something that's been a trend for a long time now for artists, like for celebrities and for brands and everything, is kind of, it goes back to that idea of honesty and transparency, but the behind the scenes stuff, like how the sausage is made
Yeah.
type stuff. And something we're trying to do more of is take an industry and the Monotype, is take something that's, you see this very polished. I mean, designers have spent hundreds of hours probably working on a typeface, making engineers making sure that it works, and then you have this polished, wonderful asset that brands can use. But we're trying to say, okay, what can we do to showcase what that process is like? Because something that's been revelatory for me is looking at an artist's sketchbook. How did they go from nothing to this final logo?
Yeah.
If you're doing a redesign, or if a brand is rebranding, a lot of times we'll see a brand rebrand and we're like, how did they get to that logo, or what happened? So how can you uncover that process and really tap into what the thought process is behind creativity? So from a channel perspective, I think video is one I really like working in. I don't do as much as I would love, but I like working in that channel. From an approach standpoint, I think it's really just about, something I say to people all the time is, you take for granted how much you have to offer. And so
Absolutely.
whether if you're a designer, or if you're in finance, or whatever your discipline is, you probably just think that everyone knows what you know, but that's not true. So I love working on stories where I can interview somebody, where I can, like I said, shine a camera on them and say, okay, how did you come to this idea? Or
Hmm.
what is your process? And they'll say something, oh, well, obviously I do X, Y, Z. I'm like, well, that's not obvious to anybody. That's actually really interesting.
Hmm.
And so that's the kind of the approach that I think works really well, is when you can just tap into somebody's process,
Hmm.
regardless of, again, if it's creative, or if it's in, building dashboards, or speaking, or whatever the hell they're trying to do. Just seeing how somebody thinks, I think, is a really compelling way to tell a story.
Agreed. Well, Bill, you're near the beaches of LA. I've got to ask you this question because of the name of the show and because of my nickname. But what is your favorite kind of
Sharks.
shark and why?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I am not a fan of sharks as a predator.
There's plenty
I
of
think
baby great whites off the coasts of Malibu.
there's a lot of sharks out here because
Yeah,
it's cold water.
cold water.
Uh, However, I just don't get the, like, being afraid of sharks, because if I come out of the ocean, they can't get me. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to show up in my house. So I like to think of sharks as more of a misunderstood creature. Um, and I'm going to go with the hammerhead shark, just because I think it's a funny name and a funny look. And I'm a funny looking person as well. So I kind of relate to them.
Yeah, good point. Well, Bill, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Let's do it, Kenneth. I'm
All right.
ready.
Number one, improv or stand up?
Ooh, for me, it's improv, because I just love the idea that I can show up and make something up on the spot, and it will never exist again, and then leave.
Yeah. Number two, LA Rams or LA Chargers? I think those are the only two, right? You
Ooh,
haven't stolen anything else away from St. Louis or San Diego lately, have you?
no, I'm gonna go with the Chargers, just because my Patriots beat
Yeah.
the hell out of the Rams in the Super Bowl, so I'm gonna go with the Chargers.
All right. Well, I'm going to check on the Arch in St. Louis. Make sure you haven't gotten that one.
Not yet.
Number three, Seinfeld or Saturday Night Live?
Ooh, man, that's a really
That's
tough one.
Sophie's choice right there for
Yeah,
comedy.
I don't know if I can pick one. I'll give you this. Culturally, Saturday Night Live, as a just a real spectacle, and just a wonderful storytelling mechanism. I'm always a Seinfeld fan. I think they're both really, really great for their own reasons.
Agreed. Number four, here is a monotype fontish type of question for you.
Oh boy. Okay.
Sans serif or Comic Sans?
This one's easy for me. Sans serif. Actually, we just published a great article about why brands have historically really picked sans serif fonts as their brand typeface. There's a lot of interesting history behind it. So
Yeah,
hop over to monotype.com and check that out.
yeah, that was a loaded question because I had just read that article. So, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Whew. So my wife is from the South. My in-laws are in North Carolina, and I love cornbread, but I think that I'm more get biscuits when I'm there. I think I got to go with biscuits as my real authentic self.
There you go. So, Bill, where can people find out more about you? Grab a copies of your books, find out more about Monotype and more.
At the risk of all the other Bill Connolly's out there,
Yeah.
you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I
Connolly.
think you
post
probably
all the
have
stuff.
more connections on LinkedIn than he does.
Well, probably he doesn't need to
Exactly.
pawn himself off on LinkedIn to people to get notoriety like I do. So, but I'm there. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Bill Connolly. I'm not very active there, but I do have the username. That's
Yeah.
the one place where I got Bill Connolly as the username. And of course you can go to monotype.com and check out our page there, because we're always posting some cool, interesting stuff about creativity and about branding and all that sort of thing. So
You don't have
those
any
would be
trips.
the primary spots.
You don't have any trips planned to Scotland anytime soon, do you?
Not to Scotland. I'm going to England soon, and maybe I'll hop over and try to find my namesake. But yeah, hasn't worked out yet. I haven't found him yet.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you, Shark Kenneth. I appreciate it. Thank you for
bet.
having me.
So there was my conversation with Bill Connolly, the director of content at Monotype, an author, speaker, comedian, and he's a subject matter expert at creative storytelling. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, you can't make someone listen to your content, so work first on building trust so that they'll want to listen to your message. As Bill said, try to provide value to the audience as opposed to trying to pull everything to a sale. Second, take all of your assets into creating a compelling brand story. And with visuals, even look at fonts. Even those visuals can have an impact on your story. Stories are also great, especially when you uncover a process. So as a brand, don't try to be funny just to be funny if it doesn't fit you or your audience. Just be more you and work on making an emotional connection. It's likely that humor will be that emotion, but as he said, focus on the story first, and humor may come as a result of it, and that's great. I'm a big fan of using humor, but even a bigger fan of tapping into emotions in general to tell great stories. Third, and I can tell you from my own past firsthand on stage, there's a lot that you can learn from stand-up comedy and improv other than how to be funny or tell jokes. One of the things that it helps you do, and it's done this for me as well, is that it helps you become more expressive and creative and hopefully a better marketer. He even cites a great example of the barrier of a podium and when you present. Skills that become of this help you engage better with people, and those are transferable always. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. I just would like to say thank you. So I'll be here all week podcasting, so try the veal and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.